I quit my job of 6 years, effectively canceling my boss's vacation plans. Reddit. What stories of instant karma do you have? Story 1. I was working with this complete at the sandwich shop where I work. She was 17, I was 18. I was telling a coworker about how my boyfriend had proposed to me, and Bitchface comes up behind me and says, I bet he only proposed because the condom broke. It caused me to burst into tears, because I'd also just recently found out that there was only a 2% chance that I could have kids, and I was still very sensitive about it. After coming out of the supply room, I went in there to cry. I asked her to come out the back door with me so I could have a word with her. I didn't want customers to hear us because we likely would have ended up yelling. Anyway, I told her to keep her nose in her own business and blah blah blah. She decided to slap me, pretty hard too. I didn't hit her back because we were directly in front of a camera. So I went inside and called my boss. He had seen it on the live feed at home and had recorded it. He was already on his way. He came in and dragged her out the back and fired her. Last I heard, she was unemployed, pregnant, and stuck with some deadbeat. Story 2. My first job out of high school was working for a rather famous and nationwide guitar store chain. At first I thought it would fun, getting to be around guitars all day and talk music with fellow musicians. Turns out I was wrong. That 10-hour shifts 5 to 6 days a week while listening to slidey too loud overhead music and 14-year-olds play the first 5 bars of Crazy Train over and over and over again wasn't actually all that great. But I stuck it out. I needed money and I have one of those don't quit ever attitudes. When I got hired, the store was in serious trouble. They had recently fired a huge chunk of the staff for skimming profits and selling pot out of the warehouse. Their numbers were really low, and corporate as breathing down their necks. But, as it turns out, I have a penchant or selling stuff that I know about. I was the accessories guy and got really, really good at it. I was routinely rolling $30K or better a month out the door, and the most expensive thing I had in my department was only $500. I also had one of the lowest return rates on the West Coast, and a file with several letters from happy customers saying how much help I had been. Eventually, the store's numbers improved, especially my department. Eventually, we were number 1 for our district and number 3 on the West Coast behind Hollywood and San Francisco. However, none of that mattered to the GM or anyone from corporate. All they wanted was more from me. My numbers had to be better every month or I'd get yelled at. I was written up for having a low sales month one January because I went on vacation. I would get daily emails and phone calls from the district and regional managers demanding to know why I hadn't hit X in sales yet. My hours got bumped up to the point where my days consisted of sleeping, showering, eating, and working. I had zero social life. My GF at the time would go weeks without seeing me. Eventually, because of the stress, I developed an ulcer. So I decided to quit. I threw myself into my last month, which just happened to be December, the month all retail workers hate. I worked extra hours, sold as much as I could, contacted old customers, you name it. Blew everyone out of the water, rolling just shy of $80,000 in gear. My boss called me into his office and said I was doing a good, not great good job, and to keep it up. I pointed to the sales numbers screen, pointed out how well I had been doing and how well liked I was by the customers, and asked for a raise. He laughed and said no, so I handed him my resignation letter. 2 weeks later, I was done, and starting classes in college, something I'd had to put off since work wouldn't allow me to cut hours for school. I came back to the store a couple months later, as someone who had worked with me called and said they'd found a jacket of mine in the warehouse. When I showed up, the GM wasn't there. I asked, and what I was told was that apparently, corporate had noticed me, and when my GM had failed to retain me, they'd fired him. Also, that department went from number 1 to number 9 in the district, out of 11 stores. The district managers were scrambling to recover. A few got demoted because of how things panned out. And the extreme higher-ups were not happy that the district was in such a state. I laughed the laugh of the vindicated. TLDR. Quit the evil empire. People got fired or demoted because of it, and I had a good belly laugh over it. Edit. Jesus Christ, Mother Mary, Joseph, and all their dancing little midgets. I was not expecting this kind of a response, let alone someone sending me Reddit gold. I have a big dumb grin over here. And for those of you who work retail, take a chapter from my book. Work hard, become indispensable. Either the company will be decent and reward you, Or they'll be corporate douches and you can them by quitting. Stand up for yourself. You don't need to be treated like a machine or worse. Story 3. Two regions of my company merged into one. The manager of the other region was a complete. He was about 5'2" and walked around like he had something to prove. He treated all my employees like garbage and made them feel as though the reason they were choosing the other site over ours was because of the quality of work, when in reality they got tax breaks in the other state. Our numbers were far better in every category. But their labor was cheaper, and that is what mattered to the company. They gave my employees 4 months' notice. At first, they all thought it was a good thing so they could get paid while looking for another job. Nope. He made their lives absolutely miserable. He doubled their quota much higher than his own region, cut commissions down by 40%, and made weekly visits chewing me and the other sales manager out for not hitting the new goals and that there was absolutely no excuse. 1 month. The second to last month, we hit the new goal. Not for him, to get our employees paid finally. And he then reamed us out because of the amount of vacation time used. Even after explaining employees needed days off because they were interviewing other places, since we're laying them off, and that I would not deny anyone time if they have it available. He tried getting me fired for this, but I had too many friends. Well, here is how the karma comes into play. I had worked closely with some corporate folks over the 2 years I was there. They found out my region was being shut down and thought I would make a great fit in their corporate office to be in charge of operations. Operations over the Midwest region. A-holes region. I kept it quiet. I didn't make any mention of it until I showed up at his office with a clipboard and a laptop. You should have seen the confusion in his eyes. Him. Are you visiting or something? Me. You could say that. Him. Well, I need to make sure security knows you're here. Me. Oh, they know. I just had to show them my badge. I whip out my badge and show him. My picture, in front of the red, white, and blue flag. Only people that have a photo in front of a red, white, and blue flag are corporate employees. His was mine, and his face showed sheer terror behind his twitching lips. I was fair to his employees, but boy did I report every rude and asshole-ish incident that went down there. His lack of cooperation, his condescending demeanor towards his own employees. It only took a few weeks for him to pack up boxes. Apparently, employees had been complaining for a long time, and it only took a little corporate push to get him out. Most satisfying moment in my working career. Ever. Edit. My dad was a businessman and always told me, always, treat everyone at work with respect, because you never know who will be your boss one day. Good advice. Even during the revenge process, everything was done by the books and professionally. Yet deep inside, I was thinking, karma is a TLDR. Wouldn't do it justice, you gotta read it, you lazy. Story 4. Something like this happened to me today. This who bullies me, because I'm a bit of an outcast in my high school, said to me, today, the only reason why you are here is because your grandma was a who gave birth to a mother. My grandmother died yesterday. The principal overheard her. The principal and I are good friends and knew about my grandmother's passing. And now she can't walk on graduation. Edit. Spelling. Edit. 2. My grandmother's obituary. Story 5. I'm an IT consultant and have a rep of being really competent with Microsoft Exchange Server. A couple of years ago, I bid on but did not get a project to upgrade an Exchange 2003 environment to Exchange 2010. Multiple servers, multiple sites, and right up my alley. The firm that won the bid did so by pricing it extremely low, about 40% below my price, which was on the low end to begin with. Totally unrealistic pricing, but they thought they could pull it off with their people. Their people were good generalists, but did not have a handle on Exchange 2010. I told the customer, who I'd done work for before and who I'd had a good relationship with, that it was not going to end well for them. They took it as sour grapes on my part. Fair enough. I had plenty of other things to do anyway, so I just moved on. 2 weeks after they started the implementation phase of the job, the other consulting firm augured in. The entire email system stopped working. No mail coming in or out, no mail flowing between any of the Exchange servers, everything just dead in the water. I find this out when I get a call late one evening at my home from the other consulting company begging me to pull them out of the fire. I told them no thanks. An hour later, the owner of the other firm is at my front door trying to convince me to help them for the sake of the customer. This is well after dark and the conversation does not go well. He ends up screaming at me and I slam the door, then call the cops because I'm tired and afraid that I'll do something stupid if I continue to interact with the guy. Cops come, he loses it, they arrest him for disorderly conduct, and I have his car blocking mine in my driveway. I have it towed off. I had to pay for the privilege, too. He spends the next 24 hours in jail, about average for getting through the Dallas County Jail, I'm told. The customer called me the following day, and I again declined to fix the mess. By this time, I decided I didn't want any of that on me, period. The customer ends up getting Microsoft services in to fix everything. Cost them about 5 times what I was going to charge, by the way. The customer sues the other consulting firm, which promptly files for bankruptcy, closes its doors rather than deal with the lawsuit. Don't know if this was instant karma or not, but it's the first time I've had the opportunity to tell this story on Reddit. Story 6. My stepdad is a driving instructor. I went to get my license pretty late, 22. One day, he was giving me a lesson and we were going over one of the possible courses that the test takes. While we're driving down a street in the suburbs, a guy is tailgating the out of me. Really gangster-looking guy, looked pretty much exactly like Steve now that I think about it. Sideways hat and all. Every time I come to a stop sign, I do a full stop, obviously, and he throws his hands in the air and yells. It's starting to stress me out, but my stepdad says, "Don't worry about it, watch this." As we're going down the street, he says, "Okay, now in about 50 feet, I want you to start slowing down a little bit, and right when you are in front of that school zone, pull over to the right." So I do it. Right after I pull over, the guy who is right, pissed at me now, takes off like a bullet. And about 5 seconds later, a cop steps out from behind a tree and waves him over for going probably double the speed limit in a school zone. We laughed. Hard. Edit. Typo. Story 7. I worked at a Kmart in high school. It was a small store, so I worked everything. Electronics, stocking, cashier. You name it, I did it. I asked a woman and her son, about 12 or 13, if they needed help finding anything as I was out on the floor, and the kid immediately bitches me out for annoying him. I ignore it and go about my business. Right after that, I get called to checkouts. As I'm working there, here comes the pair. The kid has gone all out back in the electronics area, with some EA Sports titles and a GTA game. I'm checking them out when the age prompt comes up for the M-rated game. I decide to take a chance. I flip the game over and inform the mother that this game has been rated M for the following reasons, and read the list off the back of the case. There is an awkward silence, then she angrily informs me that the son said it was only a little violent. Kid wasn't able to get anything that day. Story 8. I was flying cross-country on a space-available ticket and ended up having a layover in Chicago. I was walking around trying to find a restaurant close to my hotel, and I passed this dude on the street, begging for some money to buy something to eat. Now, I'm used to seeing people with a cardboard sign or whatnot, but actually approaching people was pretty new to me. I thought to myself, man, this guy is probably just looking for drug or booze money and I'm going to call his bluff. So I walk up to him and say, "Tell you what, I won't give you any money, but I'm on my way to get a bite to eat, and if you want, you can come with me and I'll get you whatever you want." I was feeling pretty cocky and figured he would turn me down with some excuse. Absolutely. I was not expecting this. So he picks up his stuff and starts walking with me, and we settle on some Ruby Tuesday or Applebee's-ish place. He says he can't decide between a big steak or ribs, and I wave him off with my hand and tell him I have no problem buying him both. As we eat, he pulls out the biggest knife I've ever seen in person. I'm talking like Crocodile Dundee. He puts it on the table and says to me, "I can't tell you how fucking hungry I was. Everybody was passing me on the street, some of them would glare or ignore me, some would talk or toss in their 2 cents because I just wanted drugs or booze. I told myself the next who had something clever to say to me was getting cut." I was fucking frozen. Conversation eventually moved on and we both finished our dinners and I talked him into dessert. In the process, I told him I was extremely interested in his knife and was in the market for one, and I offered him $250 for his. He was ecstatic and sold it to me. I just figured that dude really didn't need a knife on him like that, and he could use the money. I gave it to a cop and said I found it on the street. Maybe some life was saved. Who knows? Life taught me a few lessons that night. 1. Don't judge. People aren't always who you think they are. 2. Be nice. Story 9. My ex-wife fucked around and got pregnant by some other guy. I took my son and moved out and he moved in with her. I stepped back, did nothing vindictive at all, and just let the two of them wreck each other's lives. They were so thorough about it, I wound up feeling bad for them. It wasn't quite instant, but it was something that took care of itself. I never did anything to move it along. Well, doctor. The best punishment for a man who would take your wife is to let him have her. Story 10. Was working a job where I was doing 90 hours a week but only getting paid for 45. Boss blew up on me over the phone, so I quit effective end of day. I finished up all of my work and he tried to sweet-talk me into staying, but I held strong. Turns out he had to work 18 hours a day for the next 2 weeks trying to find a replacement. Edit. Some additional details so I can stop answering the same questions over and over again. I was being paid under the table, so that hurts a lot of my legal recourse. I was on a 90 business day, so 18 weeks. Trial period. If I stuck it out, I'd go on the books. For less money as taxes and the like would now be taken out. I didn't start at 90 hours, but the work gradually crept up and the duties got piled on. I was a manager for a truck dispatching company, so I'd technically be management, but our agreement was hourly. I didn't around at work browsing Reddit or playing flash games. I would literally sit down, start routing the guys and writing up reports, and then put out fires all day. I'd be lucky to leave at 5 p.m. most days. I'm supposed to be done by 3:30. I'm aware of how incredibly illegal this was on his part, but it was 6 months ago, and one of my best friends, who has kids, works there. The boss is the type to just close up the shop and retire just to everyone over, and he can absolutely afford to do this. Basically, it was shitty, but I learned a lot from it, and it was a long time ago, so I'd gaff anymore. Thanks for all the advice and tips. Lastly, all of you programmers automatically assumed that I was in programming. If it's practically the accepted norm that you guys are going to be abused this much, maybe y'all should really start working together on getting a union running. Good luck, guys. One of my best friends just got his CS degree and I know what kind of he's going to have to go through. Story 11. I tried to explain to my company how they were breaking the law with one of their procedures. They didn't listen, said somebody up the line would have caught it. Later, illegally fired me whilst I was on FMLA leave. Was, statistically at least, their best employee at my position out of 500 people. They got fined $250K for the violation I brought up several times. I'm still unemployed, but I go hiking all day and love my life. Have enough saved up to last me until I do find work. Fuck 'em. Story 12. It isn't a job-related story, but my little sister's friend was being a real to me. Following me around, mocking everything I said, making rude commentary on everything I did. I told her she shouldn't do things like that to someone older than her, because it could have dire consequences. Anyhow, they conned me into playing hide-and-seek with them, and the rules were to stay in the house. I searched high and low for that little and couldn't find her anywhere. My sister had no clue either, and neither of us heard the doors open, so we didn't think she could be out there. Turns out the kid decided to say fuck the rules and go outside. Well, she hid in the back of my mom's truck. It has a camper shell that can be locked from the outside. I guess someone saw it open and locked it while the kid was hiding inside. She ended up her pants. I volunteered to unlock it, and I took my sweet time, staring at her with this eating grin. It was great. Story 13. Wasn't instant karma, but whatever. A couple years ago, I had a job for a company where I worked in the estimating department and would occasionally do some accounting work and anything else they needed me to all for minimum wage. I always did my work quickly and efficiently, knew more about my department than anyone else there, and even taught the guy they hired to run the estimating department after the previous manager left how to do his job. One day, a couple days after I had totaled my car, I got done with my work and was waiting on a ride home. Normally, I would have just gone outside and smoked a cigarette until my ride got there, but this was a couple days after I had decided to quit smoking, so I decided just to wait in my cubicle instead. Another employee there who was above me in the company who didn't like me at all walked by and started berating me for sitting in my desk and not doing anything. I went on to explain to her that I had done all the work available for me for the day, wasn't on the clock, and was just waiting on my ride. She starts yelling at me about how there was trash in the break room to take out, which was never one of my responsibilities at my job because we had a cleaning company to do that. I told her I didn't think to do that because it wasn't part of my job, but I complied anyway. Well, apparently that was enough to get me fired. However, instead of doing it themselves, they decided to make my dad, who also worked at the company, fire me. They didn't say they were firing me, just that they didn't need me anymore. A couple months later, the other guy in estimating who I trained how to do his job quit without notice. That's when they realized no one there knew how to do his or my old jobs. So they called me up begging me to come teach them how to do everything he and I did there. I just replied by saying, "Oh no, you don't need me," and hung up. TLDR. Old job fired me over some bull by saying they didn't need me anymore. Called up a little while later asking me to teach someone how to do my job since no one else knew how to. Reminded them they didn't need me and hung up. Story 14. I was stopped at a red light waiting to turn right. I couldn't see if there was any traffic coming because of how the intersection was set up, and the bus in the left turn lane, so I was just waiting for a green. The person behind me clearly wanted me to turn because she was honking, yelling, and giving me the finger. After a couple seconds, she decided to drive around me and was immediately T-boned. Story 15. As the low man on the totem pole, I got to do all of the grunt labor and random tasks that required working on weekends and such. As a master engineer working in a 9-to-5 job, being paid less than a pizza delivery driver. Then my boss decided that I no longer got to comp time, leave early or whatever, to get back some of the time spent working on weekends, because I was salaried and it was part of the job. So when I quit to go get my PhD, they realized that I hadn't used any vacation time. The ultra penny pincher had to write me a check for 2 extra months worth of pay as I walked out the door. Story 16. I worked as a database administrator for a community center for one summer in university. Basically, I created a database for them to track who was donating to them and how much they were donating, and who was volunteering at the center and for how many hours. Very simple work, and despite being the youngest person on staff by about 25-30 years, I got along well with all of my coworkers except for my immediate boss, who was a total. The next spring, I was applying for jobs and emailed my old boss to ask for a letter of recommendation. Much to my surprise, she told me that she didn't write recommendation letters out of principle. I was pretty pissed off about it because I was finding it very difficult to find a position, and not being able to count on my most recent employer for a reference was a definite blemish on my resume. However, in spite of this, I managed to land a decent job. Lo and behold, my old boss emails me on day one of my new job, begging me to come in because she had somehow ignored all the warnings in the user documentation I wrote and moved some files around, rendering it impossible for her to access the database. She asked if I would come in, and I emailed her back and told her I already had a job and couldn't do it out of principle, effectively rendering my entire summer at the center a waste of time from their perspective. Saksnan dar. Build database for company over a summer. Boss won't write me a reference out of principle. Database breaks due to error between keyboard and chair. Turn down boss's plea for help out of principle, thus nullifying my entire summer's work for them. Story 17. When I was a teenager, I was in a van with a bunch of my friends, all stoned out of our gourds. We stopped for gas at a place on a busy intersection. One of my friends points out some action happening in a car parked next to the street and says, "He's beating the out of her." Sure enough, some is bouncing his girlfriend's head off the dashboard. Now we were no innocent teenagers, and this van was our mailbox baseball mobile. We grabbed our bats and prepared to intervene. But just as we were getting out, the girl grabs the keys out of the guy's ignition and throws them into the street. I can see the rest in slow motion, clear as day, even though it happened more than 20 years ago. The guy races out of the car in a huff, runs into the street, bends to pick up his keys. He gets back up, points at the car, and starts to yell something, his face red with rage. Just then, a little sports sedan turns the corner at speed and hits him straight on in the legs. Motherfucker does a flip over the car and falls into a limp pile. Girlfriend runs to him, crying in remorse. As I said, we were stoned, carrying drugs and bats, a bunch of rock kids. We were in no way prepared to stick around and talk to the cops, so this was the last I knew of things until a few years later. One night, back from college on winter break, I was telling this story at a party. A girl looks at me funny, starts asking me date and location questions. She was really freaking out. Turns out she was the driver that hit the only she didn't know he was Ann. No one at the scene, including the girlfriend, said anything about the abuse. The driver had felt guilty for years about running down some innocent guy that just happened to be standing in the road, crippling him for life. My chance retelling of the story took a huge burden off her. Story 18. I was targeted for firing. It had nothing to do with my performance, everything to do with my manager's manager that took a disliking to me. I walked the line of perfection for about a month until I found another job. I handed in my 2 weeks' notice, That was victory number one. I stole about a half dozen of their employees and got them hired into my new company. That was victory number two. Yes, Redditors, sometimes being in a right-to-work state works for the little guy. Non-compete clauses are almost completely unenforceable. I'd like to think that victory number three was the 30 or 40 employees they lost in the following year. But I can't claim direct responsibility for that. Thing is, when you have employees with high-demand skills like software engineering, you best treat them right. Story 19. Was working for a certain snack food kitchen when it first came to my state. I was their primary producer, meaning my 8-hour shift every night made about 80% of the product for the stores the next day. And it was usually just me that was making the product and sending it down the other end for a team to decorate and pack. I was the one person who would take whatever shift they gave me, and always did the shift that had all the work, the no time to chat shift. The shift before me without fail screwed around and made my shift a nightmare. I called management out on it, saying that if I left a shift without cleaning my equipment or making the yeast brews ready for them to start, I'd be sent packing. The shift manager just laughed at me and tried to blame me for the yeast brews, which were meant to be running for 4 hours before my shift started. But I had to make myself straight away. I refused to take the. She decided that what I really wanted was a week or two without shifts. Effective the next night. I went home, typed up my notice of resignation, addressed to the full manager, saying I couldn't work for such an incompetent shift manager, and that I need to work for a place that is willing to give me the commitment to shifts and pay that I was originally promised there. Less than 2 weeks later, I get a call. Our production line has completely died. You're the only one who knows how to fix it. Can't pay you cash, but can give you a few dozen of the product for it. I enjoyed those few dozen Krispy Kremes. Good. Couple of months later, see, they've gone into administration. All stores closed, and now only selling out of fuel stations. I know I didn't directly have a part in that, but felt good. Dal.R. Krispy Kreme. Incompetent shift manager. I quit. Production equipment dies less than 2 weeks later. Called in to get it going. Few months later, company in administration. Edit. This is in Queensland, Australia. Story 20. Worked for a small lottery parlor chain for the better part of a year back around 2008. It was a single-employee operation, so I worked a 10-hour shift with no breaks or a lunch. All in all, it wasn't a bad job and had good tips. One day, out of the blue, the region manager calls me into the store and tells me that I'm suspended. No warning whatsoever. I asked her why, and she flat out tells me that I'm frightening away the patrons because of my sexuality. Gay. The next day, she calls me to say that I'm no longer needed. I tried for a lawsuit, but it was he said, she said kind of thing. Flash forward to last month. I get a call from a lawyer asking me if I want to take part in a class action lawsuit against this company for discrimination and unfair wage compensation practices. I told them my story, and now I'm a class representative for the case. I'm so ready for this court case. TLODR, fired from company for being gay. Years later, part of lawsuit against said company. Delayed karma, but oh so sweet. Story. 21. I had a summer job in a very famous amusement park. Ha ha, mouses, mice and ducks everywhere. My job was to sell ice creams, cokes, and popcorn in carts scattered around the park. We had several managers, and every morning one of them had the duty of assigning all the employees around the carts. I am quite tall, 6'6", 198 cm. And some of the carts had very low roofs, which meant I could not stand up in them. These also happened to be the busiest and most hated carts by employees. Most managers would put me in roofless carts after I asked nicely. However, this one thought I was trying to dodge the bad carts and would always put my name on the list next to one of them. Every time I would have to ask to be moved, call another manager, it was a pain in the back, and she hated me for this. Then came my last day. The hated manager was on duty and assigned me to a location that looked more like a small fast food place, with a small house where several cashiers would sell food and guests could sit down to eat their food. And because they had paid an ungodly amount of money to enter and for their food, guests never cleaned up their trays and left everything on the table, which meant that someone was there to help with sales, but mostly to clean up tables all the time. Of course, on that day, that was me. The park closed at 11 p.m. The location closed at 11 p.m. too. So usually cashiers would end their shift at 11 p.m. and the helper at midnight to have 1 hour to clean the place and leave. My shift ended at 11 p.m. too. I asked the if she wanted me to close at 10, and she started yelling saying that the place closes at 11 p.m. And there are no exceptions for me. You can guess it. At 10:50, my colleague closed the place, counted his money, and I left. I, of course, went with him and left a disaster scene of full trashes and dirty tables behind me. We both went back to our HQ. The sees me and explodes, asking why I left an hour early and that I need to return and clean the place. She says that I could have big problems and get fired on the spot for this. I had been waiting for that moment all day long. I proceeded to show her the employee's timetable, where next to my name you could read 3:11 p.m. last day. I clocked out while she was calling me all kinds of names. I heard from some colleagues that she had to ask some of them for help. Nobody wanted to do extra time late at night, so she had to do it herself at almost 1 in the morning. Der. Manager at some fast food place treated me like, misjudged my final day working hours. I left her with a huge literal mess on her hands and she could do nothing about it. Edited for typos. Story 22. When I was a kid, I was the youngest of all the kids on my block. The other kids, including my sister, would have fun tormenting me. They would try and exclude me from things on the basis of, you have to be X years old to do it. The worst of them was Marcus, who would always be a complete. One day, Marcus and I, along with some of the other kids, went to a nearby school to ride around on our scooters. Oh yeah. Marcus convinced me that to be cool, I had to jump down a flight of 5 stairs. I succeeded, but broke my scooter in the process. As the kids rode off, laughing at me for not being able to join them, Marcus's front wheel caught in a crack in the concrete. He flew over the handlebars straight into a flagpole. I nearly died laughing. I broke my scooter. He broke his face. TLDR. Asshole neighbor tricks me into breaking my scooter. Immediately loses teeth on a flagpole. Story 23. Okay, so my job wasn't quite as impressive as that, but here it goes. My fiance and I were workers at a Pizza Hut. She was a waitress and I was a cook. I had worked for NPC for 5 years, and she had worked for them for 2. Anyway, we were probably the best employees they had and knew what we were doing. Nevertheless, in the food business, managers come and go, some better than others. So we were both scheduled a ridiculous shift about 2 hours in that. From open to 8 that night, we would have been the only 2 employees there in our respected positions until 5. Keep in mind this was a Sunday morning in the Bible Belt and a buffet day. So both she and I had a ton of work to do. On top of that, they had steamed the carpets the night before and never set the tables and chairs back up in the lobby. We both only had a couple hours to do our opening stuff, which every minute counts. So what happens? Our fucking manager goes and gets breakfast, sits in a booth and watches my fiance and me put the lobby together, bust our asses to do our opening half because we ran short of time. My fiance comes to me in tears saying she just wants to leave because this day was completely fucked. So what do? We wait, buffet coming out of the oven and at least a dozen people walking in. We both just say it and leave, leaving him by himself to manage that like he should. Fucking just sat in the office to let us do all of the work. Do I feel bad? No, that was swift justice.